Are there any changes to the agenda that anyone needs to bring to our attention? Mr. Williamson couldn't be with us today, but all other board members are in attendance. As we go through the action agenda items on the rules, we will take each one individually. If you have questions, legal will come and answer those. If you don't have questions, then we will hear a motion, and in that motion, be sure and say, I move for approval of the motion pending governor's review. Okay? Everybody, we're good on that? All right, here we go. We have a marathon. Jennifer, the first one, several are yours, so be on alert. Consideration of release for public comment of the rules governing federal program compliant resolution changes. They were made to incorporate the new names of title program under Essa. The Division of Elementary and Secondary Education respectively request that these rules be approved for release for public comment pending governor's review.
I beg your pardon, Madam Chair. I noticed that there are two items on the agenda that should have been pulled. Items number 7 and 8.
Oh, that's perfectly fine with us. Which are they?
They are the rules governing enrollment of students of military families and the repeal of the rules governing military student enrollment.
Okay, so that's number 7.
And I believe number 8, if I'm not
7 and
mistaken.
8. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No problem. Does anyone have any questions of legal on item number 1? There being none, do I hear a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
I have a motion by Ms. Newton, a second by
Second.
Ms. Dean. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next is parental involvement. I'm not going to read the whole thing every time. It's in front of you. It's on the agenda for the public. Do any of you have questions relative to this item? There being none, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Have a motion by Mr. Peckron,
Second.
second by Ms. Chambers. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Number 3, consideration for release of public comment of the rules governing consolidation or annexation of public school districts. This is not relative to those things we're talking about in Little Rock. This is for other things like declining enrollment, those kinds of things. Are there any questions for legal on this item? There being none, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Mr. Peckron,
Second.
second by Ms. Newton. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 4, credit district by detachment. Do you have any questions on this item? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. McFettridge, second by
Second.
Mr. Peckron. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion opposed? Motion passes. Item 5, consideration for required training of school board members.
Just a quick comment, I was glad to see the how to read an audit report put in there. I think that will be very helpful. In fact, I think in some of the things that we had done before, I would have liked to have had that training. So,
Another board member had mentioned to me training.
yeah,
You know, so
that would have been helpful.
I think the orientation, but it might can incorporate some of these kinds of things
Yeah.
would be helpful. Any questions of legal? There being none, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. Dean, second.
Second.
by Ms. McFettridge. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is school choice. Any questions? Being none, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Mr. Peckron, second by
Second.
Ms. Dean. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There being none, motion passes. Okay, now let's see if this is where I got off track when I was reading these. Number 9, 7, and 8, is that correct? Okay. Number 9 is the Rules of School Choice Act of 2000. Okay, all right, I'm back on track now. Any questions on this item? There being none, do I have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Dean, second by Mr. Peckron. Any comments?
Dr. Hill.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Hill, I didn't look, I was just guessing. Motion by Ms. Dean, second by Dr. Hill. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And then the next one is the repeal of the Opportunity School Choice Rules. Number 10, any questions? We have a motion.
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Moved by Ms. Chambers, second by,
Second.
that was Mr. Peckron. Okay, second by Mr. Peckron. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Distance Digital, number 11. I have a comment on this. I think it's terrific that we are trying our best as we move to more student-focused restorative justice, trying to help kids who maybe make bad decisions, that we're giving them an opportunity in out-of-school suspension and, if they're expelled, to still, if the student will step up and do it, then we will provide the opportunity. Okay, do have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. McFettridge, second
Second.
by Mr. Peckron. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. The next is course credit and grading. Any questions? We have a motion.
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Peckron, second by Dr. Hill. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And then number 13 is to repeal. Any questions? We have a motion.
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. Dean, second by Ms. Chambers. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 14 is the repeal of concurrent credit rules. Any questions, comments? Do I have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Chambers, second by Ms. Newton. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Number 15 is the repeal of the former AP rules. Let me catch up here. Any questions, comments? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Mr. Peckron, second by
Second.
Ms. Chambers. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Instructional materials. Okay, no questions, no comments. I have a motion.
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Have a motion by Ms. Dean,
Second.
second by Mr. Peckron. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion opposed? Motion carries. Then, this is where I jumped around. Okay, the next is, okay, the big guy is what I call this one. This replaces all of our former governings and rules on a lot of different areas, and is very important and critical for the schools. The rules governing Arkansas education support and accountability. Have any questions or comments? Okay, I do have some. I wanted to point out that the thing that we have been referring to in the past as NSLA dollars or NSL dollars are the things that it's now called the Enhanced Student Achievement. And the purpose of this is to narrow the achievement gap, which some districts are doing and others maybe not so much. So we, really want them to focus on that. At 5.07, it says 3 to 12 assessed. So that was a little confusing to me because I know we do different kinds of testing K2. I know we do Aspire 310. I know we do ACT in 11th. I wasn't aware of any tests that were given unless it's the career test in 12th grade.
There is someone from assessment here who maybe could better answer that than I could.
I apologize for not contacting y'all ahead with my questions, but there were so many.
Yeah, no, we
and
understand. That's fine.
I didn't want to call you at 2 in the morning, so y'all, you can be happy about that.
I was ready for every rule you gave except this one.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So what was the specific question?
Assessments are given in grade 12.
It
In grade
says
12.
3 through 8 assessed, and I couldn't recall unless we're talking about when they take that credential for career test in 12th grade or in 11th grade. I wasn't sure why it said 3 through 12.
Okay, so you are correct. We don't have a state assessment in grade 12. I want to say maybe that this was a previous statement that it had always been inclusive of grade 12.
Just in case we decided to. Okay. Okay, you want to
Civics.
repeat what she said, or you want
Civics assessment.
Okay, good.
Most students take it well before the grade 12, but they could take it their senior year.
Okay, that answers that. And then 8.05, I think the part that I focused in on is that in keeping with our stakeholder involvement, it says that the improvement plans yearly involve stakeholders. And I hope our school districts will really focus on that because Ms. Dean and Dr. Hill and Kim Wright and that committee did lots of work, and that's all been rolled out. Am I correct that in understanding what that says?
Yes, and it is an existing requirement from Act 930 of 2017 that, yes, the school district engage stakeholders when they're developing their plan of support for their schools and the school level support plan as well.
Okay, and then 8.10.1, it talks about the state's responsibility in plans for level 5. Is that the same as an exit criteria, or is it in addition to?
I'm sorry, tell me which number again?
8.10.1.
Yes, that would be the plan that's developed in conjunction with the district, detailing the levels of support that we will provide in order to help the district meet its exit criteria.
Okay, and I think that's all I have. Anyone else have anything? Dr.
Yes,
Moore?
I was going to either ask here on the reading for Stacy, the district literacy plan, can you speak to that a little bit? And is it in the code that it has to be a district plan versus a school plan? And what, just a little bit more around that.
It is in code. I can answer that part, that it be the district plan, but
So in the literacy plan, it's a part of the school level improvement plan
Okay.
that is submitted at the district level. And then the district support plans are in response to the school level plans. So the literacy plans for each school and their school improvement plan has to have a literacy component that addresses their professional development and it addresses the curriculum that they use at their local schools.
Okay. And so then that will be incorporated into the larger district plan.
Right, and the district support plans then should address the needs of the school level plans,
Okay. Will y'all be,
plus curriculum.
will your unit be looking at these literacy plans in all districts or in districts in certain levels of support, or what will that look like?
Do you want to address how the plans are?
So we have a district support team put together that has a person that stays from Stacy's team and some people from my team. And we're going through those school improvement plans and then district support plans. They're out on the road today. They're out on the road doing trainings with school districts to make sure that they're all clear about what is required in there. And then they'll be providing follow-up to any district or school that doesn't meet the expectation.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Do we have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. Newton. Second. Second by Ms. McFetrich. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 18 is test security and test violation and tampering. I think the thing that, we have over times had several PLSB cases come before us on the consent agenda where this was an issue. So I'm glad that it's there, it's clear, people can refer to it, and they understand the responsibility. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Have a motion by Ms. Dean, second
Second.
by Ms. Chambers. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Let's see. Okay, 19, rules governing special needs funding. Have any comments or concerns? Do you have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Moved by Ms. Chambers, second by
Second.
Mr. Peckron. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, rules governing Succeed scholarships. Okay, I do. She knew I would. And I'm sorry, I didn't note the specific on this, but it says that a child can be eligible if the superintendent okays whether they were previously in a traditional public school or not. Okay, that's been in the rules.
Yes, that was it wasn't in the rules, but it was added to the law in 2017. We're just behind in updating the rules.
And then it goes on to say that an IEP or an ISP has to be written by the district who has never had the child. So that's troubling for me. Can you help me walk through that?
So it is standard practice under IDEA that if a student in a private school wishes to receive services from the public school will develop a service plan, an ISP, for that student
Right.
detailing the services. They would not typically be developing an IEP unless they actually placed the child in the private school in order to receive FAPE. And again, this was just an attempt to marry the laws that have been passed, which did extend the eligibility criteria to include service plan, but knowing that under IDEA, it has to be developed by the public school.
Okay, so this gets me a step further. Since the public school, and I think there's been confusion out there about, is it the public school in which the private school is located, or the public school in which the students' parents live, their resident district?
It's the public school in which the private school is located.
Okay, and then since the traditional public school is not spending any money on the Succeed Scholarship, that state money, I don't understand why the resident district has to develop an IEP or ISP for a student they've never seen and for whom they're spending no money.
So it wouldn't be the resident district. It would be the district where the private school is located.
Okay.
Under federal law, they have to spend a proportionate share of funds on providing services to homeschool and private school students. And so in order to do that, they are supposed to have consultation meetings with the different schools and parents, determine what services they're going to provide, and then again, they develop a service plan for each student, not necessarily based on the needs of that student, but based on what the public school district is willing to provide, and then which the parent is choosing to receive for their child. So a student might actually need speech and occupational therapy, but if the public school district is only offering speech, that's the only service that that child would even be eligible to receive.
So it's not a full plan? It's
Correct.
just a plan focused on that?
Correct. Again, it's not focused on what that child needs, it's focused on what the district is willing to provide.
Okay, and it's not necessarily what they will provide, it's just what they would be willing to?
Correct.
Okay, so I think and is there another rule or somewhere that speaks to the fact of children who are benefiting from the Succeed Scholarship? They've never been in the public school, they will be receiving no service from. Where can I find out what the district's financial responsibility is? Is it in addition to Succeeds, or to fill out the Succeeds, or the difference between what it would have cost had they sent a speech therapist over there? I mean, can you help me with that?
Yeah, so in our special education rules, there is a section that specifically talks about private school proportionate share and district's obligation to provide services to private school students. I can't tell you the exact
Well, that's
section number,
okay.
but I can send it
No,
to
that's
you.
okay, please.
But that does lay all of that out in there. And again, then there is a formula in the federal regulations that actually tells a district how to determine the amount of money. And it's, again, too complicated for me to explain, but it has to do with the number of students in the public school, it has to do with the number of students in the school district, even including private school, and then there's fractions and percentages and
Right.
things. And then once they arrive at that amount of money, again, the district has full control over saying how they are going to spend that money.
Okay.
And to kind of answer your other question, it doesn't necessarily take into account cost of providing the services, only to the extent that when the district is determining what it's going to provide, they of course internally would say, well, we know this is how much a speech pathologist is going to cost us. We have to expend X, therefore we can provide Y hours for that cost. And they only have to provide up until that amount is spent. So if they spend all of their funding in the first 6 months of school, they are not obligated to continue to provide services the rest of the year.
So they can either provide the money, or they could send like a speech therapist over there X number of days a week to work
Correct.
with that. I think this is where the confusion came from some parents not knowing who to talk to, not knowing which is it resident of the school they're in, or resident of where I live, or anyway. So I think that now that we have this, and you have a really good grasp and understanding and explain it in terms where those of us who aren't attorneys can understand, I think that will be very helpful.
Yeah,
So
and
thank you, you work on this.
Yeah, I think some of the confusion came with private schools who had not previously worked with the public school districts, also not understanding. So we've made sure that they are communicating with the public school district, who they all know what their obligations are, so that they can jointly communicate with parents as to who's responsible for what.
Right, and I think some of the families who had advocated to the legislatures who passed this law were thinking they just wanted, because the private school was doing an ISP, they were thinking this dude, and then they realized, no, we have to, I don't want to use the word jump through hoops. They had to understand the steps.
Correct.
And it was new.
Yes.
And the law took effect July 24th, but the rules hadn't been fleshed out yet. So, I think that now we can communicate with the districts, communicate with the parents, communicate with the private schools, and I think it'll go more smoothly in the future.
Correct. There was some misunderstanding that just because a private school develops something and calls it an ISP doesn't mean legally it is an ISP.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments there?
I have two
Dr.
questions.
Moore?
if you don't
Yes.
mind, Courtney. So first is the state board's involvement. We get involved when a student transfers only.
Correct.
Is that in statute?
No, it's not, and so actually, that is one of the proposed changes
Okay,
that we
that's what I
made,
thought.
so that transfers would not even have to come to you as the
Okay.
board, that we could handle those internally. Again, just because of the routine nature of them.
Right. Well, to me, it didn't make sense that if we didn't approve it at the onset, why,
Right.
that makes sense, I guess I overlooked that.
And if it says shall approve as opposed to may, so it really
Right.
wasn't even up for discussion.
Right.
The other was, and I think this is in statute, we wanted to check, the eligible private school has to send a lot of information now,
Yes.
one of which it says the testing and their test results. Is that each student in the school's test results, or just those that are doing the Succeed?
Just those that are receiving the Succeed Scholarship.
Okay.
Yes, and that is in statute, and we will be working with different entities on collecting that, making sure everything remains secure and confidential.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Moved by Ms. Dean, second
Second.
by Mr. Peckron. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Being none, motion passes. Now, let me get back on track here. 20. Okay, requirements for personnel policies, salaries, et cetera, number 21. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mo- Second.
Motion by Ms. Chambers, second by Mr. Peckron. Any, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Number 22, Public School Computer Network and Information System. Questions? Comments? Motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Mr. Peckron, second. By Ms. Chambers, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is Schools of Innovation. Questions? Dr. Moore?
Yeah, I do want to make a comment on this. So, schools of innovation, we don't play a role in as a state board, correct?
That's correct. I think it goes straight to the secretary, and he and his senior team work with the person making the application. I don't think we even see the application, do we?
No, is there some way we could get an annual report or a report as those are applied? Because I feel like I keep, not that we have to know, but it would be helpful to understand what's going on with these schools. How are they different from district conversion charters and that kind of thing, so we have a better picture of what's going on in the state.
Yeah, I'd be happy to provide an update on that. I mean, we have we keep a lot of information about them, so that would be under Stacy Smith's unit, and we'd be glad to put that together.
Yeah, it would be helpful, because I think when we think of innovation, because like the first one was the one that's a whole building in Springdale, and so when we hear innovation, we've got to understand there's a lot of different kinds of innovation that doesn't involve a shiny new building and a lot of money.
Right. There's other, when we talk about charter schools, the idea that they are in front of the charter authoring panel quite frequently, and that if they are not following their contract, it can be revoked. Is there any mechanism? There is a mechanism for y'all to revoke schools of innovation?
Yes.
Are y'all doing some sort of annual progress reports, or how to?
We are, and if y'all would mind, I'd be happy to let Stacy come and explain more of that process, because it has changed recently. We've gone more to where you start out getting the School of Innovation designation to one where you work your way to achieving that designation. So if
Yeah,
Stacy could.
and
describe
that's part of the reason why you're seeing these rules and some legislative changes. Originally, school would submit an application for a School of Innovation, and if they passed the application phase, they were designated, and everybody put the signs up, and you were never guaranteed that they actually followed through and met the level of their application. So in this process, we actually go through. We've extended even the timeline of going through an application process. It takes about a year, and they have to show evidence of having community meetings. There is a process for the application. There's group meetings, there's community meetings, there's an application phase, there's feedback. I mean, there is a process. Once they are approved for a School of Innovation application, it's just the application that's approved. They're not designated at this point, okay? So they are approved for the waivers to start working towards meeting this designation of a School of Innovation, and that's the change that you're seeing in these rules. So where a lot of times, the group that works for School of Innovation, we've actually created teams throughout the agency that actually go and visit that school, conduct interviews. There's been a couple of times where once their application was approved, we've done site visits and asked questions and saw that they were making growth towards their application, but maybe they weren't ready to be designated. And so we've given them a timeline that they have to substantially show growth towards meeting what they put in their application so that they're designated. And so it's generally taken about 1 year to 2 years after an application's approved for them to be formally designated, but that counts within their years of designation. Does that help?
That does help. When they're applying, they can apply for all waivers, just like you could in 1240 or...
And we follow the same procedures that a school would follow applying for a charter. It goes through our legal unit. Our legal team actually counsels and talks and pushes to, do you really need that? Do you not need that? When we go through the process of even approving an application, it is through a committee at the department from all different units, different divisions that go through that application part. They then make recommendations. It then goes to Commissioner Key's office, in which district leaderships many times will actually do Zoom interviews with the school, asking questions and clarifications on their applications and what they're trying to, what their intent is. So it's a pretty thoughtful, rigorous process.
That's great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be helpful.
And is it for a period of time?
A school of designation, I believe is it 5 years? I have to go back through here, it's in the actual rules. I believe it's 5 years, is it 5?
Yeah.
After reading this
And then they
meeting?
can reapply
Okay.
and to be redesignated.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Do you have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Dr., sorry, it was listed. Okay, by Dr. Moore, second by Ms. Dean. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. The next is the new right to read rule, which is a very exciting rule to me. Any questions or comments there?
Yes, I would like Stacy or someone to speak a little bit on this, if you
I
don't
think
mind.
Ms.
Just-
Hyatt was the attorney. I don't know if you need questions from her, or maybe both of you come to the front just in case.
Squeaky shoes, sorry.
You never knew that until just now.
And I didn't have a very specific question. I just think this is such a big deal, something y'all have been working so hard on, and so wanted to hear from y'all some of the highlights of what you see and how this will be implemented.
So first, it was hard. These rules actually pulled from several pieces of legislation regarding reading. It actually hits on the professional development's requirements for proficiency and awareness. It actually outlines the licensure pieces for what teachers have to do as far as the awareness, and we had to work in conjunction with licensure rules for that. We actually laid out the program evaluations and approvals that we will be doing at the department, beginning to review literacy curriculum materials and resources that school districts may then purchase in the future for their districts. So that kind of lays that out in Section 7. And then just the educator preparation programs, what their components are and what they have to have in place to meet this legislation, and then also what happens if you don't, the violations for not meeting the requirements for the Right to Read Act. So this was really, we were constantly getting questions on what are the different requirements for legislations, because they're the pieces of legislations for science of reading have come in 2 different sessions. And then you have dyslexia, which goes even further back. And so for us, it was trying to make it in one place for districts to see and for us to even be able to point to and give clarification and guidance.
That's helpful. As far as the process that the teachers have to do, is that just licensed teachers or if you're an Act 1240 teacher?
It's all, if you're employed in a
Okay.
position, in K-6, you have to show proficiency and any other grade awareness. So it is based on your employment as named as teacher of record.
Okay.
And
Thank
it includes special ed as well, right?
Yes,
Okay.
special education for proficiency.
Does it include special ed K-12 or just
Yes,
K-6?
K-12.
Okay, I thought that's what I remembered, yeah,
Thank you. Thank y'all for
You're
all your
welcome.
hard work on this.
yeah. No, go ahead. Oh, she just, okay. Do have a motion on number 24.
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. Newton, second by Dr. Moore. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 1240 waivers.
Just a comment, I was glad to finally see some rules on 1240.
I was gonna say, surely nobody's gonna, somebody's gotta say something,
Yeah.
because this is what y'all
It
been
was
waiting
like-
for years.
I always put smiley faces on my kids' papers, so this one has a smiley face on it.
And now we can revoke, is that correct?
I'll leave the legal questions to the legal experts.
Sure, let me find it in the
And I'm
rules,
sorry, I
but
should have
yes.
made a note of which
If you
place.
look at section 5, it does say that you can exercise a right to review waivers at any time. And if you conduct the review, you do have to give them at least 15 days' notice that you're going to bring them in and review their waiver. But you can modify the waiver, you can revoke the waiver in whole or revoke the waiver in part. And I also put in here that you now have the authority to require the annual reporting that
Within
you
a
guys
year.
have often
Right.
expressed an interest to have.
And I think that's important because I don't know, I know in legislative intent is not a rule, but originally the things that were addressed was so that this rule may be getting in the way of us being able to narrow the gap, or it's hampering our ability to educate a child, it's not helping. So I think that's why we ask when we bring the 1240 people in, can you demonstrate that your student achievement has, or student growth has in fact improved? And if not, then, what other purpose are you using for that waiver? So, do you have a motion?
I have
May
a
I-
question, actually.
Okay,
And
sure.
I have a comment,
Okay.
if I may, after the question.
Go ahead, Dr. Moore.
So we will be facing a lot of expiration of waivers in the next couple of years. And I noticed there's a renewal form. Will we have discretion over those renewal forms, or are those automatically approved?
So I think the charter unit has had a 1240 extension request form that they've just been using in practice for the extension of waivers when it's nearing the expiration date. I think they're in the process of reviewing their forms to kind of update them. So if you've got feedback on that, I think it would be really helpful to them. What we did, and if you kind of go to section 6.05, it goes through all of the requirements of information that has to be provided on the extension request form, such as the things like the name of the charter that holds it, how long they want it, but there's also things like how the waiver enhanced student learning opportunities, promoted innovation, or increased equitable access to effective teachers, how the students are served, how the district monitored and evaluated the data and the effectiveness of the waiver. So we tried to kind of capture the things that we ask them ahead of time when they ask for the initial waiver to come back and reflect on that piece in the extension request form.
Will we have a hearing on that?
Yes, they'll come back in front of you, just
Okay.
like an initial 1240
Okay,
request.
good.
They'll come back, it'll just be an extension request rather than like an initial 1240.
Okay, that is.
It's the same
and-
process that you guys do now, it's just they fill out a different form.
Okay, and so we'll still have discretion? Or
Yes,
we will have now have
absolutely,
discretion
absolutely.
over that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say, you all are probably at times like me in that you get frustrated with this notion that seems to be out there in some circles that we're just up here granting waivers willy-nilly without any rhyme or reason. And, you all have been asking for some ability to control this process. We didn't ask for this legislation back in 2015. We, the department, certainly not the board, and y'all have been as judicious as the law allowed you to be with respect to granting 1240 waivers. This rule is needed, and I know y'all know that. We were able to get the legislature to realize that there needed to be some methodology rather than just they ask for a waiver, and as you have seen in the past, well, it's because so-and-so has it, we want it too. I appreciate as a board, your continued pressure to bring this type of control, if for lack of a better word, to this process. Because we don't just grant waivers willy-nilly. We don't seek to just put warm bodies in teaching positions. And, I just say it's frustrating when we get accused of doing that. This rule helps us move to more of a sensible method of weighing the waiver requests, and this board having more of a say in how they are allowed, how they can be revoked, and how they can be renewed. So I just appreciate the personal privilege opportunity, Madam Chair,
Absolutely.
to say,
and we
because
appreciate the fact the department understands our concern to stay student-focused and not just make the paperwork in central office easy.
yes, ma'am.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay, Dr. Peffer?
Yes, and sorry, but also every 1240 request that comes through, we review it internally. And what we've really tried to start working toward is thinking about, so the revision of the standards for accreditation. I think that was a first major step in really listening to what we've learned over the years from the benefits of school districts being able to have waivers and writing the standards in a way that you really need to have a good reason if you're wanting to waive a standard or wanting to waive a law. And I think also we're working with school districts to help them understand there are other avenues. So the board could grant a 1-year waiver from a standard for accreditation in a special case scenario. It would not have to be an Act 1240 waiver. And so that's where we're trying to go with these rules, that these rules need to be more about, like Ms. Sook was saying, that there's really a true intention. There's a larger plan, and it is an avenue for a district to accomplish that. But if it's just simply that a district, there's a situation in a district with ratios of position to students or class sizes or things like that, we really want to move away from utilizing Act 1240 for things like that and really push districts to be looking at what are the multitude of options and also around teacher licensure. Changes you've made are allowing a lot of flexibility. Sometimes it's a little more work for a district. So I think the team has really done well there, and I just want you all to know that that's kind of the bigger picture that we're working toward to get them to the right place before they come to you all.
Okay, thank you. And I think another thing that gets said a lot is there is no scrutiny of charters and conversion charters, which is absolutely not the case. They can be brought in, a waiver can be revoked, a whole charter can be revoked. There are hearings, and that group actually has to go before 2 different panels in order to convince otherwise. They can be called in by the charter panel at any time. So another way that we're focused on students. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. Newton. Second. Second by Ms. Chambers. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Number regulatory basis of accounting. Where's Mr. Williamson when you need him? He's our resident banker. Do you have any questions regarding this? Do you have a motion?
Move to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Ms. Dean,
Second.
second by Ms. McFettridge. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. And ABC rules,
I have a question on this one.
okay.
Um,
Of legal,
Yes, probably.
okay. Here she comes.
Um,
When you come to the microphone, because we're being recorded, I have failed a couple of times. Go ahead and identify yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Sarah Collins-Lynham, Department of Education.
And let me pause to introduce Sarah just for a moment, because she is a new face to many of you. Sarah is part of the team with the Department of Education at the Secretary Office level, and has been working with some of those entities that have come under the umbrella now, and ABC being one of those. So that's why Sarah is before you today. So we're glad to have her on board. She's a great addition to our team.
Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
My question, and there may be nothing, it may have to come from legislation, but I noticed back on the Rule 20, which was about the Succeed Scholarship, there was a provision for foster children after they were adopted. And so my question is, could that provision be put into the ABC rules where a foster child after they were adopted could have those funds continue on and be provided?
I don't think there's anything in law that would prohibit that, and in fact, it is practice. So that is how the program treats it.
It is not practiced. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I will double check with Susan, but it was my understanding that that is how they proceeded, and if there is a specific program that's having an issue, let me know, and we can contact them and
Okay,
make that
but I would really like to see that put into the provision, into the rule, then if it is supposed to be practiced, that it would be practiced, that after they were adopted, that funding would continue.
Because we do have instances of which we are aware where I'm sure it's a misunderstanding, a lack of knowledge, but we do know there are children who have been adopted who in fact are having now to pay on the sliding scale because, maybe the family that adopted them is above the 200% poverty rate.
And that shouldn't be happening.
Right,
So,
okay.
yes,
So
just
any
let me
help you
know
can
which.
help with this would be
Absolutely.
appreciated.
Yes.
Okay, so that can be put into the rule?
Yes, we can add that to the rule.
Okay, thank you.
And I do appreciate the fact that now we were told in the past, when rules would come before us, if we had comments or concerns, what we said from here didn't necessarily get done, so we were supposed to go to the meeting or send in an email, and now they said that any comments made by the board at the time can be written down and considered a part of public comment. And for that, I appreciate any effort that anybody, I don't know who put the effort in, but I appreciate it.
I do want to make one comment about this. Ms. Lyman did a great job walking, the ABC rules were new to us at the department, and she did a great job walking us through them. And we do actually see several areas that need to be updated. Even working with DHS and the folks who were previously responsible for these rules, they had gave some suggestions of things that were outdated. At this point, we really decided to just kind of go with the transformational updates, give our staff time at the department to really get their arms around ABC and the programs, and then most likely we will be coming back with some more substantive changes to the ABC rules, making sure that they are updated. There's references in the rules kind of to out some dated assessment pieces and some things like that, but we were just not prepared to make an overhaul of these rules to begin with. And she did a great job walking us through those and actually taking notes on areas that we needed to come back and revisit. So I appreciate Ms. Lyman's work on that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Ms. Newton. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve pending governor's approval.
Motion by Mr. Peckron, second.
Second.
By Ms. Dean. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Yay, people. Thank you all so much for doing all the homework that it took to get us to this point today, and thank you for legal and learning services and everyone else who contributed. It certainly was a chore, but nonetheless, I can't think of one single one of these that isn't student-focused and will help make us better as we learn what to do next. Okay? Now we move on to the reports part of the agenda. And as you'll notice on there, it has changed. Okay.
We're gonna take a break so Ms. Sharon can get her things.
Oh, sure, let's do that. Absolutely. It's a good time to take a break anyway. We'll come back in 9 minutes, which will be 10 o'clock. recall, in the past, we had the liaisons, and they would give reports, or sometimes they did have reports, sometimes they did. And also, we would, occasionally, the teacher of the year would have a presentation or report she would do. So I sort of compile, or asked them to put this into one item. And so it's, when it says state board members are the presenters, sometimes you'll have something that you want to report on, and sometimes you will not. So I think that'll work out. Dr. Moore is going to be the new liaison with the preschool programs, and Ms. McFetridge will be the liaison with the career part of the umbrella. And if there's other parts of the umbrella that we haven't covered, somebody can let me know. We'll begin, and I know Ms. Newton has an update on the Essa. Do you want to give it now, or when Ms. Smith does her part, or what do you prefer?
I've got a couple things, and then she can.
Okay, if you will.
I actually have a little bit on NASB first, from the governor's committee meeting. From the congressional update part, the one thing that I think that we might be interested in was, it said that unless the Senate had a bipartisan progress, there would not be HEA reauthorized this year. They did not expect that to happen. Under Essa updates, Georgia and North Carolina have been approved for the innovative assessment, in addition to Louisiana and New Hampshire that had already been approved, and so that makes a total of 4. There's still, I think, 3 spots, so they expect a new round of applications to come out on that. 2 states, New Mexico and California, have been put on high risk for not taking into account English language proficiency achievement. So I feel, our work our state has done, I'm very proud of them, that we have done what we're supposed to, and our plan is great. This might be of interest. They have established a new disaster recovery unit at the Department of Education. It's a 5-person team, and they're going to implement disaster recovery grant programs. Hopefully, we will never have to have that, but it is available. It's available to have immediate aid to restart school operations, has impact aid for displaced students, assistance for homeless children and youth, and school emergency response to violence as related to disasters. So I pray that we'll never have to use that, but it is available. And one thing on NAEP, the schedule for 2019 to 2029 has been released, and a couple of differences there. They're adding state level results for reading and math in grade 12 beginning in 2027. Previously, it had only been grades 4 and 8. Adding those state level assessment results for civics in grade 8 beginning in 2029. And they're eliminating arts, geography, economics, and foreign language, which was scheduled but had never been assessed. So that is the NASB information, other than the annual conference is in Omaha, Nebraska in October, October 16th through 19th, and I'm sure you all got my information on that.
Okay, good. And for those who are new, if you haven't signed up, you can, and talk with Ms. Newton about how to do that, and then you get all the NAEP emails and things that are going on nationally.
On Essa, we had our Essa meeting at the end of August. It was a great meeting. We have one new member. Her name is Starlinda Sanders, and she is the CTE director in Bentonville, and she really had some great comments and is a great addition to our group. I think it is going to be very helpful that she's there. I'm gonna, one of the things that we got was the alignment study, and Ms. Smith is gonna give you some information on that in just a few minutes, so I'm not gonna talk about that, other than I was thrilled at the information that we got and very pleased with the results. Ms. Boyd told us that the business rules for 2020 had been released for next year, so schools can start studying them. Of course, we know that the school index and ratings are going to be released mid-October, but I'm going to say what Ms. Kaufman said. They're hoping to get report cards released earlier this year than they did last year. I won't put a date on that, but earlier is better. So we are looking forward to that. And our next meeting is going to be December 11th at 9:30, if any of you are interested in coming.
I think your comment on the homeless just reminds me and Ken, all of us, that another reason why it's important within urban districts, but actually across the state, because the homeless children are parents near the bottom of the poverty, often move frequently. And if they can go from one school to the next within a district, or one district to the next, and they're still getting the science of reading, a curriculum that's focused on that, then that will do nothing. At least school hopefully will be the least of that child's concerns, not a stumbling block. So I appreciate that. Mr. Packron, Dr. Hill,
Nothing.
Ms. Chambers, Ms. Dean?
Our team with Kim Wright and Chelsea Moore, myself, we had another meeting on Thursday, September 5th, I think of last week. Things are moving very quickly. The framework and the toolkit have been rolled out. There's been a great social media campaign. So there's been a lot of buzz around family and community engagement. Kim Wright and the team have been putting out, I think, weekly videos from different teams, team members from the coalition, just speaking about how they're starting to implement the framework and the toolkit in their communities. So they're going to keep going with a weekly video and stay on Facebook and Twitter and things of that sort to really create a buzz around family and community engagement. Chelsea Moore has been tracking the hits on the toolkit website, and since it's rolled out and they've been doing the social media campaign, it has shot up considerably. I think it went from 50 to quite a few hundred. I think maybe over 1,000 hits. So it's been growing, and they've been boots on the ground. They've been traveling all over the state, speaking on family and community engagement. They've been getting more invitations to conferences. People really want to know how to engage the community and their parents and family members. So it's definitely picking up. Ms. Gina Dickey, who has helped us along this path the whole time, she has transitioned to being on our advisory committee. I believe we've spoken with our coalition. We've met with our coalition and just kind of gave them the overview of everything. So everything seems to be going very well.
That's great.
Let's see if there's anything else I'm missing. I think that's it.
Okay.
Just keeping up the good work.
Thank you very much. Ms. McFedridge, Dr. Moore, Ms. McAdoo.
I should have grabbed the clicker though. So I have
Well, you go stand in front of us. We like to look at you.
so basically, this is month 2 of my official duties as Teacher of the Year, and I'm just gonna talk a little bit about what I've been doing since August, I guess. So the last time I ended with July. I went to Johnson County School District and provided classroom management for all of their teachers. This was the announcement of the finalists, which was my first, I guess, official speech as Teacher of the Year, which was, I was a little nervous, but I think everything turned out quite well. After our on that same day, after I left the governor's mansion, I went and did professional development in Hot Springs for their new hires and helped them to think about their why. The next day, I left immediately. No, this was, I don't know, we had a board meeting, or we had something, and I left here and went to Conway, and we were doing a Say Your Piece poetry camp with middle school students in the Conway area. And that's the poet laureate, Joe McDougall. Was with the secretary at AETN for Arkansans Ask. I participated with KUAR on a Ideas Matter, the future of education. Visited a couple of schools. That was J Fair. First day of school, I volunteered at Romine, at Central, and at Cloverdale. Throughout the first pitch, which was very fun. A couple of weeks ago, all of my days truly blur, but I went to New Orleans for the Regional Advisory Board meeting.
I think you were there when we had our last meeting. That's
Yes.
why you had that. Why
Yes.
You, yeah. Okay.
But I also, before I arrived, the meeting didn't start until the next day, so I went down to the Whitney Plantation, which is the only plantation that tells the story of the enslaved people. Specifically, it tells the story of the children on the plantation, and so this is one of the Whitney children. And one of the things about all of they're really not statues, but all of the children that are there don't have eyes, and that was symbolic of the hopelessness that the enslaved people felt. While in New Orleans, the reason I was there was for I mentioned the meeting, and it was all about educational equity and personalized learning. It was really eye-opening and made me feel very, very proud because we had some individuals from North Little Rock that were there, and so they presented on what they're doing with teacher leaders in their building and summit learning, and so that was like, hey, Arkansas, and that was them presenting right there. I presented for the Kiwanis Club in North Little Rock and talked to them a little bit about how to use poetry as they are trying to work with the youth to increase reading. I recently did a presentation with Cal's Library. They have Legacies and Lunch, and so again, my platform is using passion and poetry to close the opportunity gap. So most of what my speaking engagements or even professional development is centered around that. This is at UA Little Rock with the College of Social Sciences and Communication, and I was actually able to bring all of my AVID students to the campus, and I was one of the guest presenters there, so that was really fun to see my students. At the Arkansas Comic Con, I know that probably is not a place that people would think of increasing literacy, but as we talk about family and community involvement, those are great opportunities, and the whole time I was there, I was wishing that we would have had some type of booth there, and that would have been a great opportunity because every kid that was there, first of all, I was really surprised that I'm still surprised that I go places and people recognize me and know me, and I'm like, what? You're paying attention to this? But a lot of them kept coming up to me and they would show me their artwork. They would tell me about scripts they were writing. So, and these are kids who typically are not the kids that you think about when you're talking about scholars or literacy or any of those. They're marginalized in a different way. I went to this elementary in Jacksonville, and I was with their faculty after school and did some PD for them. The other day I was the keynote for the PTA Council and talked about the role that families and parents can play in our students' lives. I went to Harding And I was originally requested to go to Harding to talk to the interns, and then a few days before, they said, well, can you come up early and talk with all of the supervisors in the Teachers College? We just want to sit down and have a conversation. And so we had a roundtable conversation, mostly centered around equity and cultural responsiveness and educational practices and theories that they're doing, and they were wanting to know if these were still applicable. And it was a really, really great conversation. The students, once I talked to them, had a lot of questions. They were very, very attentive. Those are some of the cute little kids. The next day, which I think was yesterday or the day before yesterday, it was Wednesday. It was before we came for the work session. I was at Henderson, and the conversation there was really focused around mental health and social, emotional needs. That's what most of the interns there were most concerned about. So that was a great session. The name of the session that I led there was Hot Topics, and so it allowed them to ask all types of questions that they wouldn't necessarily maybe not have previously had a platform to just free flow with those questions. Those are the AVID students that I mentioned at the campus, my AVID kids. I was like, yay, I love you. And in the interim, so those are like the major things, which still isn't everything, because I have also still been very involved in community forums, lots of different meetings. I actually came up here to the division and went to civilian response to active shooter. I sat in on that session. And I didn't think to take pictures when I was in there, so that's what this picture is. But I learned a lot in that workshop, and we had a similar one in my school district, but it wasn't like this. So I took a lot of notes, and I'm actually going to meet with Mr. Poore next. I don't know, I have to look at the calendar. I meet with him sometime, but that's on my list of items to share with him, because they gave really practical information on how to just how to be alert, how to be prepared, even in terms of, like, I'm looking at the window. If you need to get out of a window, the best way to break the window. You know, you don't do the middle, you go towards the edge. And who knew that? I didn't know that. I was able to go back to Central they had their first poetry club meeting that they wanted me to be there for. So this is the very first meeting. And no, it's not a class. Like, that's how many kids actually show up to hear and recite poetry. And I think that is all I have on what I've been doing for the last however long. So thank you.
Very busy.
Yes.
Hopefully you have a understanding family who understands the importance of the work you're doing and being away from home.
And the good thing, honestly, is that my biological kids are now away at college, because honestly, I don't know how any of the teacher of the years previously who had small children were able to do all of this, because I'm gone so much. I can't even count the amount of days that I've actually slept at home in my bed. And that's got to be really, really challenging on people, especially with smaller children. So I'm just glad mine are out of the house.
I agree with that.
For lots of reasons. Okay, and then I visited a site here in Little Rock that is housed in connection with, but not in connection with, St. Mark Church, where we had our meeting, and it's called Tundaji, okay? And it's run by Sheila Hayes, and the service they offer for free, because they're a nonprofit, so they get funds, and the things they can cover right now, and of course all donations are appreciated, I think it started out as serving students who had out-of-school suspension at the middle school level, and then now they are doing some before and after school. They are working, and they will expand and offer services, whether it's tutoring or the social emotional or whatever it might be, as they can afford to do, but it is a terrific service. They have worked out some stuff. I think Dr. Hill can relate to this about having an opportunity for the kids to be transported to actually get there. He runs into this same thing with Sixth and Gold. You know, a child wants to, could benefit it from it, but so that's all worked out. But if you get a chance, they love to show off their program, and my goodness, that facility is just, you know, spectacular. So that's good. Okay, Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when Ms. McAdoo posted that picture of the back of our building, I wasn't exactly sure where she was going with that, because that fire escape doesn't really get you down to the ground. We hope we never have to use it.
But that was another thing that they actually talked about. So they, if you are ever on a second or third level floor, like there's a specific way to jump out of a building to not hurt yourself. And I was like, what? I'm serious. Like that was, I really appreciated that.
Yeah, the fact that we have Mr. Kamenar and you know, his expertise just goes a long way. But I hope no one ever has. But I appreciate the fact that we do have those. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, we don't talk about those types of things often enough. But I'll tell you, when it comes to the internal security type issues, we have a great team that does help make sure that our team is prepared should the worst event that we can imagine actually does happen. So thank you for participating in that, bringing that up. I have a number of things on my list. Probably there are more things that I'm going to miss from the last month, but yesterday we announced the Computer Science Awards for the schools. I think y'all may have seen that, but the momentum on computer science continues to build and be sustained, and I'm really excited about that, and the work that Anthony Owen is doing to really keep that momentum going. You know, we've been doing this for several years now, and as can happen so often in education, an initiative grows stale, but he has not allowed the initiative to grow stale. And the governor certainly has not allowed the initiative to grow stale, because he is on his coding tour again this week. So you've probably seen some news about that. But I would just speak to the winners, Bentonville High School, Mountain Home Career Academies, the Greenwood Freshman Academy. This one I'm kind of excited about, and I definitely want to dig in a little bit more. Kirby High School, y'all may recall, Kirby School District went to a 4-day week now, but the word is coming back to us that they've actually grown enrollment, and we don't know if it's the 4-day week being attractive or things like this that they're doing, but Kirby received an award, $5,000, having the largest percentage increase of students enrolled in computer science courses. So rural Arkansas there's no reason rural Arkansas can't provide that level of education with respect to computer science. So the coding initiative continues to progress and continues to build. We talk a little bit about transformation. We have, I know sometimes we get, it appears we're only working on one thing at a time, but that's not the case at all. Transformation is taking a lot of our time. I want to commend Gina. I want to commend Greg, Ivy, Adrian. I mean, so many members of the team, and as I mentioned, I introduced Sarah. She's on board with us now. That really a lot of our time is being spent on how do we make transformation work. The Transformation Action Team is a group of representatives from all of the divisions or all of the units, the School for the Blind, School for the Deaf, Martin Luther King Jr. Commission, that work to align the things that we need to align, whether it be HR policies, whether it be communications, all those things that are coming together. And Gina has been leading that work and leading that group. They have split into different subject areas, so they have committees that are working on different components of that, bringing that back to the team, and I think you're really going to see some fantastic results as we move along toward that in that transformation process. One of the things that I'm really excited about is that bringing on board not just ABC. You saw an example yesterday of how we are able to respond quicker. We can be more nimble in some of our decisions. So when we asked you to approve additional seats to be transferred to the Pine Bluff, that happened in just a day, days amount of time versus weeks or months. Perkins 5, that's something that we learned a lot in our submission for the Every Student Succeeds Act, that we are now able to help with CTE and the rollout and getting input and all regarding our Arkansas Perkins 5 plan. So we're going to try to leverage some of those things that we did with Essa now to have the outreach, the communications, all those components. Remember the videos that we did that explain different components of Essa? We're going to try to do the same thing because there are very confusing elements of Perkins that I think we can just, in smaller bites, it's easier for folks to understand, okay, what's changing? Why is it changing? So we're going to work with CTE to make sure that happens. And another example of what I think is where transformation is really showing and met the governor's goal of how do we better serve the public. You remember back in August, we had the report from the FBI of a school shooting threat. It was unsubstantiated. It was never verified as being accurate, but when the FBI sent out the alert to the law enforcement circles, it made its way onto social media, and school districts all over the state became rightly concerned. Within a few days of FBI sending that out and we started getting that feedback, I was able to call the Secretary of Public Safety, Jamie Cook, on a Sunday. She said, "You're interrupting my nap." And I said, "No, I know you're not taking a nap." But it was one of those things where within hours, we were able to have a coordinated response to be able to send out that law enforcement took the lead, but then we were able to take the law enforcement, state police response, and send that out to through our communication channels, so our school districts would know we're aware, we're monitoring. It's we kind of were able to rein in the rumor mill, if you will, to say, hey, this is important, higher alert than normal, but just know that we're all on board and we're all working together with this process. So a cohesive message was able to go out. And then I will say that that day that supposed threat was made against an Arkansas school, unidentified school. As I drove from Little Rock to Fort Smith, you could see the added presence along the way. You could see as the school districts along the interstate, you could see marked vehicles. You saw uniformed officers. You saw a heightened level of presence. So I just have to brag about that, the communications component and the alignment component of transformation really is going to,
Can I comment on that really quick?
Be better for our citizens. Yes, sir.
I know at Bauxite, where some of my kids go to school at the elementary school, they had police officers there doing the carpool line, and the police stayed there all day and were out on the playground with kids at recess and things like that. And I know that made a lot of parents feel better, and that's just the kind of coordination that's great.
The other component on transformation is now in my role as secretary. It does pull me to other parts of the education world, that pre-K to career spectrum that we have. And I've been visiting a lot of our higher ed campuses. Dr. Markham and I have been going around catching as we can, scheduling those visits. And one thing that I have been stressing in those visits is our effort on student success plans and asking them, when they ask me, hey, how can we help? That's one of the things I asked them to do. I said, would you push in to your local school districts and ask, how can you be a part of helping inform and create those student success plans? Because there are opportunities, as we all know, that our students don't always find out about it in a timely manner. So with this concept of student success plans being not a compliance issue, but truly a student opportunity issue, student pathway issue, where transformation helps us be more aligned in that work across that whole spectrum.
Mr. Secretary, can I make a comment? One of the comments that, as we toured and listened a few weeks back, was that making higher education aware of where the critical needs are in the teaching profession, what subject areas, what grade levels. And so I think this is a great opportunity with your position to be able to make sure that and I know they're aware, but maybe they can do what you're talking about with the success plans, pushing that into the college level and having them have a better chance of getting jobs and being in positions that would be the most effective and needed.
And I appreciate that comment, and where we at the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education have been engaged directly with the deans of the colleges of education. I think now, it's like you said, that the communication can be elevated to the president's and chancellor level. Maybe, not that it hasn't been before, but maybe it gets more attention now than what it has in the past. So yeah, I take that under consideration wholeheartedly.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, that's just a little bit about it's some of the things that I learned. Okay, I learned that at SAU they're using VISTA, part of the AmeriCorps program. They are using some of those folks as college career coaches. We get feedback that career coaching is one of the most effective ways of helping students be successful and see a pathway. And SAU is using that avenue in a very innovative way. Also learned that University of Arkansas, for the first time there, if you look at the overall cost of attendance, when you take into account tuition, fees, expenses, and all of those things offset by financial aid, that the cost of attendance at the University of Arkansas has actually gone down in the last year. Now, granted, it was, I think, $300 or $400, but the fact that there's an effort to move that overall cost down, I think those are things that really don't get talked about as much as they should, and hopefully now with aligned, as we get to alignment in our education system, that those are things that we can bring more attention to show how Arkansas is progressing. Internally, here with the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education, we continue our work to get better. And one of those ways that we're doing that, you've heard us talk about high reliability schools and the work we're doing there. We are taking that concept, tailoring it so that we use those same concepts to create a high reliability organization within this building. And we are currently receiving high reliability organization surveys from our team that are centered around those concepts of high reliability schools tailored for us. And the goal being use those survey results to identify where are those areas that we are weak, where are those areas are strong, how do we get better in fulfilling what we call Goal 5. How do we better equip our team to meet the needs of our students and our schools? And then really like the idea of a RISE booth at Comic-Con. Stacy, I hope you got that. It brought me back, if y'all will remember, when we went to Decatur. I don't know if y'all remember in the art class, but the young lady that was making the different pieces for cosplay. All right, so that's when I saw those students that in your picture dressed up as different characters, that's something where we can connect students to more literacy concepts. So I think that's a great idea. And finally, with respect to literacy and creating a culture of reading in the state of Arkansas, our family and community engagement team had a second year in a row of a book drive for Our House. Those of you from Central Arkansas may be familiar with Our House, but they seek to help relieve homelessness and single parents, just a number of things that they have outreach for. Last year, I think we had somewhere around 300 books, and the team announced that at First Friday, I think, in the first part of August, maybe. And so they said, we're going to have a book drive. And I said, well, how many did we have last year? They said, well, it was 300 something. I said, well, then our goal should be 500. Well, I was just popping off because I didn't know if we could get 500. They adopted that goal, and not only did we get 500, we got 867 books that the team brought together from all over the agency, and that was delivered. So we're also trying to impact our community in a large level and at a smaller level based on their work. So anyway, I'll be glad to answer any questions, or if there's anything that I didn't cover that y'all had questions about, we'll be glad to take those.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it's the alignment team.
Exactly, the alignment team. Make sure everyone knows, everyone here on my right, Dr. Tiffany Pride, who is the new Director of Curriculum and Assessment, she replaced Hope. Of course, I drug Hope back up here. When she left to go to Little Rock, we did some willing and dealing and traded some days. I said, I'll let you go early, but there are certain days I need you back here. And I do, every time she calls to ask a question, I log the minutes so that we can trade it off. And then we have Miss Rachel Horn, who is our program manager for assessment, and they'll be coming up and helping at different times as we walk through this. So, Commissioner Key, there's one thing you said earlier that I just want to go ahead and disagree with you on. When you said, I know it seems like at the department we're only sometimes focusing on one thing. I don't know anybody who thinks that. I mean, just the list of rules today, I think we pretty much blew that statement away. So, Arkansas Alignment Study. So, first off, what is it and why did we do it? All right, well, it's a requirement for federal accountability to have an assessment that aligns to the state academic standards in literacy, math, and science. Now, we submitted for peer review for our assessment system earlier, and we actually met in almost all categories a substantially met for peer review. However, they did respond with some questions that we needed to respond to, and part of that was asking us for evidence that our standards align to our assessment. And so we then proceeded on with an alignment study. An alignment study is actually the process to determine whether or not the questions that are on the state assessment are in our state standards. And so that's what we had to do. So in the alignment study, we actually hired an independent group to actually lead this alignment study. We didn't want it to be Arkansas led, and we didn't necessarily want ACT leading it. We wanted a third-party vendor to be able to come in and be able to organize and help us determine what it was we needed to do to make sure that we were able to get the evidence that we needed or to be able to submit for peer review. And so we actually hired ACS Ventures to lead this alignment study and to compile the report. And so within it, there were 3 big questions that we felt like needed to be answered within the alignment study. And you can see those up there. What was the cognitive processing or the depth of knowledge that was expected throughout the test? How do the performance level descriptors for the ACT, which is kind of their blueprint for what's on our test, How are those reflected in the Arkansas standards? And how does the ACT Aspire measure the knowledge and skills within the Arkansas standards? So I'm just going to tell you up front, the panels, when we went through this, largely found alignment of the performance level descriptor element to the Arkansas content standards with a few notable exceptions. And so today we're going to talk about, one, what are those notable exceptions and what are we going to do about it? So 89 Arkansas educators were brought in to actually do the alignment study that the third-party company led and facilitated. Applications were received by the department and for panelists to be chosen, and superintendents had to sign off on those folks being able to be released. And they were committed to being here for 4 days to be able to do this. You had 7 ELA panels, you had 4 math panels, and you had 4 science panels that had 6 educators each, 1 per grade level all the way through. The panelists were expected to review the standards, the ACT Aspire performance level descriptors, and actual ACT Aspire test forms. And panelists had to determine whether the questions on the ACT Aspire were aligned to the Arkansas state standards. So kind of here is the overall process from what occurred. So each task was started with the group of panelists together, coming together and walking through together the standards, the PLDs, and the items collectively, and discussing key features of what they would do to be able to complete their ratings. So this process right here was a little bit of norming. All right, the second step, once kind of norming occurred, they then, from there, went off on their own and had to do all the steps independently. Then they had to come back together as a panelist group and then discuss. So you didn't sit there and go through every question in the standards with a whole group. Okay, we normed ourselves, we then went independently, did it independently, and then they came back to a group to build consensus. All right, but the idea was for that individuals to be able to determine. So let's get a little bit deeper into the task of what the panelists were expected to do. So again, the first one was what was the cognitive processing or the expectations. So the panelists actually had to take the Arkansas standards with the different DOK levels, and they had to determine for every standard that they were responsible for what was the appropriate DOK level. That was their first task. Second task was they had to take the blueprint for the ACT Aspire, which we call the performance level descriptors, and they looked only at the ready category. From the ready category, they had to go through that, and they had to determine the DOK level for each of those. Then the third item was they were giving 3 forms of an actual ACT Aspire assessment for the category that they were reviewing. And they had to go through that, look at a question, and then they had to go to the standards and determine whether or not it was found in our Arkansas standards, and determine the level of DOK. So they did that for 3 forms of the assessment. So again, they would be given an example. They'd have to take that example, look at the questions, go back to the standards and determine, is it in here or is it not? If they didn't find it, they could go to a different grade level, okay, to determine whether or not it was found in a different grade level in the Arkansas standards. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So let's look at what we found with English language arts. And of course, I have all these notes that I'm not using right in front of me, sorry. So first we found that the ACT Aspire contains a spread of DOK questions 1 through 3, which is what we want. Okay, you can see for English language arts, a majority of those questions fell in the DOK level 2, which is really looking at basic reasoning. DOK level 1 is a lot of recall, 2 is basic reasoning, and 3 would be more of strategic thinking and complex reasoning. So let's look at what the average alignment to the Arkansas standards by subject was across the 3 forms reviewed by panelists. So the things that are going to jump out to you quickly are 3rd and 4th grade with reading at 77%, And then writing at 4th and 5th grade was 75%, because that's what always jumps out is what was the lowest. But I do want you to take a second before we dive into why those were low, and I want you to look at the 88s, the 98s, the 99%, and the 100% across English, reading, English, and writing for the different grade levels. There's significant alignment. So digging into the third, so once we got our results, okay, what we had to do at that point was we had to go through and we had to kind of come up with our questions. And then, because then it was our job to sit down with ACT and say, okay, this is what we found. How do you respond? Do you think you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have evidence to provide us that it's not the case? Or what can we do about it moving forward? Okay, so that was our role. So with 3rd and 4th grades, particularly in reading, what we found was where a group would say, this reading passage with these questions is found in our standards, then they would go to this one and they'd say, this one is not. Well, when ACT looked at the two, for them, they said, we're asking the same question. The STEM changed. And we were like, what do you mean? And they said, well, here we might have said, and I have this on I think the next slide. Here we might have said, what's the main purpose? And over here we said central idea. And for us, it's the same STEM question. We're asking the same thing. But in our Arkansas standards, we didn't use the term central idea, and our teachers marked that it wasn't there. So that provided conversation on, okay, that's a clarifying point for everyone. So what can we do moving forward? We then agreed that those probably were on standard, were on grade level. However, our teachers don't have that language in their standards, and that's something they're not explicitly teaching in their classroom. And we felt like that was something that we needed to be able to change moving forward. And so ACT Aspire has agreed to release their STEM questions for all their categories to us so that we can take those and embed those into our standards and also be able to give that information out to our teachers in our classrooms. Let me go back to this list here. So we found that for 3rd and 4th grade. On writing, where you see the 75%, and Hope, I may let you come up and kind of add a little bit more to the writing point. There were only 4 writing prompts that each of the panelists reviewed in this area. And so when they marked one, so a 75% would be them marking one of them as not being specific to that grade level. Is there anything you want to add to that? Okay, so it was the ability of reviewing 4, and they found 1. So substantially, we felt like overall alignment was around 94% of our Arkansas standards that were found in the assessment. Now, I've said this several times to you guys before. Not every standard that we have in Arkansas is assessed on the ACT Aspire. That's a fact. However, we feel very confident that the standards that are on the ACT Aspire assessment, that the majority of them, very high level of alignment, is in our standards. So again, talking about ACT and text complexity, there was a lot of comments by teachers on text complexity, and it was kind of all over the place. From things of names, my students would have a hard time with these names. Or the topic that was being addressed was something maybe that is not something that my students would understand or get. We had lots of teachers who said, no, it's right on level. It was kind of, text complexity was one of those things that was kind of all over the place. It wasn't a consistent piece there. ACT Aspire is going to share their qualitative rubrics and their process for determining text complexity so that we can dig in deeper to that. So let me stop there. Did anybody have any questions about the ELA portion or any comments that I have said thus far?
Well, you talked about the 3rd and 4th grade, but back up. What about 5th grade?
5th grade was the same thing. So on the 4 for writing,
okay,
there was 4 of the writing prompts that were reviewed. 1, they said, was not on alignment, and some of that still went back to stems that were possibly in the writing request. Or do you have any other comments about that?
No, I mean,
Come on up.
hi, Hope Worsham, former director of assessment.
So for writing, it really is as simple as that. They looked at 4 prompts. Now, understanding that they looked at the 4 prompts that were used in our state the previous year. So these were the tests that our kids actually did take the previous year. There wasn't a good correlation when we went in and looked at what the prompts were and the reasoning behind the panelists. So we couldn't pull anything out of that as to why they felt like that one did not align to our standards. It was just that they felt as a group that one of those was not asking what would have been either the wording that was asked in our standards, the way things were asked in our standards, or within our standards. So, but there wasn't something we could pull out of that. Like we could for the 3rd and 4th grade, it was pretty clear. The questions were were the same. It was just maybe one word, and that particular word, like Mrs. Smith said, central idea. We say main idea in our standards. Well, that's a clarification that we can make within our standards.
I think this reminds me of a committee I was on test analysis. And one of the questions that was, in what month is February? I mean, it's Valentine's, sorry. And students, what we discovered is maybe if a student lived in a home that didn't have a calendar on the wall, then they might not make the connection between the month that Valentine's is in and that thing that they do when they bring cards. So sometimes it's a matter of the test isn't, quote, culturally biased, but it does, in fact, affect a child if they don't just pick it up from just being taught or living in an environment that might be different. So I think this is excellent. The kinds of things that you're picking up on that may or may not be a problem, but if it is a problem, then let's get it fixed.
Stacy, can I ask one other thing?
Yes, sir.
And I apologize if this is something you've covered in meetings before I got on the board. You mentioned earlier that not all the standards are tested. Could you just talk briefly about that and what the efforts are to, if there are any, to get more of the standards tested?
So previously, we were, our state had very lengthy testing sessions. And if I talk about PARC, the test that was prior to ACT Aspire, it was from 12 to 15 hours test, depending on the grade level that you in. And we have gone down to a 4-hour test. When you go from 12-hour testing to 4-hour testing, you're going to lose a lot of your questions. That was something that was very clear when we went through the Common Core, Governor's Common Core Task Force, and heard from educators across the state, and heard from districts, heard from communities, heard from parents, that they wanted less testing. And ACT Aspire was the recommendation that was made to address that. So as far as increasing the length of the ACT Aspire assessment to assess more of our standards, we are not attempting to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
How long was the old benchmark?
It was days as well. It was 8 to 10, yeah.
Okay. So why do you think we continue to get pushback from all circles about the over-testing question when even the original Arkansas developed test was longer than the test we're using now?
That were the pushback that we're still getting for over-testing, or districts are over-testing. You know, there is the pressure of accountability is one, but two, it's the way we've always done things in our state, that you're practicing for this test. And a lot of school districts have adopted testing protocols in which they are testing every couple of weeks, practicing for this big test at the end of the year. And our message really is that it's really about the instruction in the classroom, and that's where the focus needs to be. It's not on the form of the test. Practicing for the test is not going to produce better outcomes. Now, I will say this: when both of my kids took their driver's license tests, we drove the path beforehand because I wanted to give them where they were going to go. But we didn't drive it every week for the whole year. We did it once or twice beforehand, and we practiced it, and we went on. But you see lots of school districts still have policies in place in which they are testing all year long. We want formative assessment used, but the best formative assessment is done in the classroom with the teacher quickly, and then that she's getting the opportunity to address that.
Stacy, just add a comment to that, right along with what you're saying. There's some standards that are in there that don't lend themselves to being tested on a computer or pencil and paper. And the best way that teachers know and understand their students is not from the test at the end of the year. It's from what goes on daily in their classroom, and that formative assessment, not that summative at the end. And that's the job of the teacher, to constantly be assessing, that individual standard, whether it's on the test at the end or not. But their job is to look at that standard and look at the student's performance. Do they understand the standard? Are they able to do the performance that standard is asking? So.
And I know we're kind of off topic here now, and I do want to jump back on, but we are at a different phase with our assessment system in our state, and it's hard to transition when you've done something one way for so long. Okay, we do have a shorter assessment. It is not the be-all and end-all for a single student, and tells the story of a single student by itself. Okay, it does give a pretty good reflection of how a school is doing as a whole when you pull all the scores together. But you should not make a single decision based solely on this assessment alone. There should be multiple measures used, okay, from the teacher's recommendations to classroom instruction, assessments. I mean, there are so many other measures to determine the needs to a student beyond just, if you've waited to give this test and find out what the results were, you waited way too long.
And I think, too, to be sure people understand, this isn't something that you and Hope decided we're going to do in Arkansas. This is Arkansas law. This is federal law. These are things that are required of us because we are entrusted with taxpayer dollars, and the taxpayers want to know, and that's why they push for non-educationese when we explain things. So y'all have done a good job. You're the messenger, but you're not the cause.
Yeah. A state assessment is a federal requirement for accepting federal dollars, which we do. So, yes.
Can I ask a question back on that?
Which
and
one?
I should know the answer to this, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So when you're looking at the 77% in third grade reading, that is not saying that the questions that weren't aligned are too rigorous, or it has nothing to do with rigor. Is that correct? It's everything.
This was the percent where they would look at a question on the test, and they would look at that specific grade level and say, is it in this grade level, yes or no? Okay. So they said 77% of the questions for a grade level were in that specific grade.
Okay. Some of
So for 8th grade, it was 99%. For 6th grade, the teacher said 98% of the questions for the reading test. For English, 7th grade said 100% for here. But the 3rd grade panel group that was there said 77% of the questions that they found on the test were specific to their standards. Now, there may have been questions on the test that were foundational reading skills, which were foundational reading skills are not on the 3rd grade standards. They're found in the lower grades.
Okay, yeah, so it's not necessarily implying that they're all above or below, they're just
right. This is specific to the grade level.
Okay.
Yes.
Another big thing to note is within our standards for ELA, there are anchor standards, and then there are grade level standards. And there, in your report that you received, there's more detail about the alignment to the anchor standards, and some of that 77% was also within that. So our panelists felt like, so the anchor standards are essentially these standards that we're developing from K all the way to 12. And so a particular word, for example, I think it's main idea is in the anchor standards, understanding main idea, something to that effect. That wouldn't have necessarily been found in the grade level standards, but the anchor standards are part of the grade level standards. And that's just an understanding for our teachers to understand you are developing the anchor standards across the years. It is appropriate to assess those across the years at different levels. And so a 3rd grade assessment of an anchor standard will look very different to a 12th grade assessment of an anchor standard.
Thank you.
All right, mathematics. So again, with the DOK levels on the ACT Aspire, we found that there was a range of DOK questions on the assessment. Again, most of those questions fell in DOK 2. However, when you look at early high school, and I want you to pay attention to that because it'll be important here in a second, Early high school, you see DOK level 3, which is strategic thinking and complex reasoning, 44% of the questions, fell kind of in that category. So that's something to remember in a minute. So let's look at the average alignment to Arkansas standards by subject across the 3 test forms for math. So for math, on the percent, you see lower percentages for specific grade levels. And this is where I want to talk about this. So 3rd grade, you see 86%, 4th, 84%, 5th, 90%, 6th grade, 90%, 7th grade, 84%, 8th grade, 60%, and early high school, 62%. So for us, especially when we got to 8th and early high school, we were like, whoa, that's pretty off. But teachers were asked when they were looking at their standards to determine whether it was in the specific grade level or go 1 grade level below or 1 grade level above to look. Is it found in either of the, the caps, really the one before? So when we looked at what were the percentage of items that were found in 1 grade level below, when you look here for 3rd grade, 86% were at 3rd grade, 12% were found in the 2nd grade standards. When you go to high school, 62% would have been found in the algebra and geometry course, where 28% of those standards would have been found in the 8th grade standards. When you look at 8th grade, 60% of the standards were specific to 8th grade, while 40% of those standards were in the previous 7th grade standards. So that was a big conversation for us, okay? When you look at that percentage part, 8th grade, 100% of the standards for 8th grade are found in 7th and 8th grade standards. But if I'm a classroom teacher being tested on 8th grade standards and only 60% of them, I want to have some pushback there. This conversation on why are there off grade level standards, why are there so many? And that is a part of the format of the test, okay? They call those integrating essential skills, foundational skills from mathematics within their test design. And what they do is they take those foundational skills or essential skills and they test them at a higher application level the following year. So let me go back to this slide. 44% of the questions were found to be at a DOK level 3 at a higher strategic application or complex reasoning. And that is intentionally done for questions that are considered lower. Do you see where I'm going there? So again, conversation on, is that something that we want in our state? Is that something that is reasonable? Is it something that is fair? Lots of conversation around this. So again, we had to sit down with ACT and say, let's talk about this. So getting into the specifics. Grade specific, 79% of the test we believe is aligned. Grade specific, including 1 grade level below, it's 98% alignment. When we said those, what are those essential skills that they have to know at a very high reasoning level? We sat down with ACT and they ran a statistical study and found that there was no adverse effect on a student's score due to having the inclusion of off grade level items. So when they were pulling the items out with grade level items and looking statistically about, did it adversely affect overall student scores having these questions on there? The answer was no, that it didn't. But we still felt like it was important to think about this idea of having on grade level standards for the assessment, because that is something that we've heard from teachers that's a concern. So we have asked ACT to begin to pull off some of those foundational skills and replace them with on grade level skills as we move forward, and they have agreed to do that as we move forward with new forms of the assessment. Not completely. We're not going to see 100% of them come off or be on grade level, but they are going to remove some of them and slowly start replacing. Now, I will say our concern, again, was, oh no, we're making the test harder. We're taking off-grade level skills, and we're going to replace it with on-grade level skills, and we're making the test harder. And again, statistically, they found that not to be true. When they started replacing items that they had and doing the test, we found that there was not going to be this adverse effect or statistically effect. But again, that was based on studies that they ran. It's going to be a process. It's going to be a slow process and one that we're going to work through together. Sarah?
Yes.
Or Dr. Moore, I'm sorry.
Sarah, do you feel that teachers already knew this?
I think that we had been hearing that the test doesn't assess our standards, and it was kind of this comment that we would hear frequently. Do I think teachers knew that there were off-grade level items on the assessment? Maybe to a degree, but at the same time, I think teachers knowing, like heading towards the ACT, what's the math content that's heavily tested on the ACT. Also, when you think about the adjustments, and Ms. Newton actually brought this up, when Common Core first came, what standards were that used to be in Algebra 1 basically got pushed down to 8th grade. Okay, and so what was in 8th grade got pushed down to 7th grade. Okay, so when we're looking at those foundational skills moving into high school, it kind of makes sense to what we see here. Do I still believe it's important for those foundational skills in 7th grade for students to have a higher level of strategic reasoning moving forward? I do. So that's why I don't think we're going to completely pull those off. But I think it's something that we need to be talking about with our teachers, and in MathQuest and the professional development that we're providing to math teachers, it's that idea of continuing to push mathematics to a higher level of reasoning, more than just recall.
That makes sense, and I think that aligns with conversations I've heard you all have earlier, especially around the early math assessment, that it's not an end-of-course assessment.
Right.
And that's it. Thank you.
Yes, please do.
I will say too, there is a lot of published literature out on our website and ACT's website about the design of the test, as far as there are integrating essential skills items, and here's the percentage of points that are allotted to those items. So that information has been out there. To the extent that it's gotten to our teachers is a different story. But I know there's been a lot of conversations with co-op specialists and at different co-ops providing professional development around that information and including that in professional developments. And we offered professional development last summer. We pulled together all the co-op specialists and offered training across the state in 5 different locations, and that was part of what we included in that training as well. So there's been information out there. How much it's gotten to our teachers is questionable.
Can I add a comment here? One of the things that, as in math, sometimes, like, let's say, for instance, in the 7th grade, you introduce a topic, and you may get kids to a depth of knowledge of 1, maybe a 2, but you don't want to leave them there. You come back later, it might be the next year or even the 9th grade, but you keep working with them, and hopefully, as time goes on, they feel more comfortable with the topic, and they're able to move up to that depth of knowledge, hopefully at the 3 level, where they can take that knowledge that they have and apply it critically. That doesn't mean that they're ready for it the first year that you introduce it, but eventually, if you saw the depth of knowledge up to, I think it was 44%, that's where you want kids to go. And so, you don't want to lower the rigor of the test. You want to keep that same rigor and that same expectations of students. And I think most math teachers at the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade level realize that you don't teach that math content in silos, that you have to keep building on that content. You may have to go back and pick up something that they were supposed to have gotten in 7th grade and they never got to a 1. You keep working with them and building with them. And so, you don't teach in silos. And, you look at you may have students in there that are already up at that level, but you have some that haven't. And so you look at the individual needs of the student. And right. Those are the goals of the standards. And that's why that I think that we saw those standards get more rigorous and have higher expectations for our students.
Because you want them to have the positive transfer from learning. The way we explained it to parents, because, they don't always get into the education stuff, is if you have worked with your child to learn how to button, but every time you get a new garment that has buttons, you don't have to reteach how to button. They transfer that ability, that application to the next thing. So helping everybody, the general public, understand what you're saying, I think is it shouldn't matter if it's taught below or at. It would only matter if it wasn't going to be taught for a couple of more years.
Right. And our goal with everything that I'm sharing with you today, Rachel's going to begin doing webinars and putting this out. This will all go on the website. She's going to do webinars for DTCs. We're going to present to co-op directors. We'll have videos on our site. We want this to be fully accessible. Okay. Okay, science. So again, on ACT Aspire and DOK levels, again, you can see that there is a spread mainly in DOK level 2 for ACT Aspire for science. On average alignment to the Arkansas standards by subject across the 3 forums, you saw high levels of alignment for science. Now, this is where we got a little bit into some of the questions because Ms. Newton actually brought this up when we presented it to the Essa steering committee. Our science standards, we have science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, cross-cutting concepts, and at the top you see our PEs, or our performance evaluation. So when you're looking at on page 30 to 31 in there in your report, you're going to see at times we actually have it marked down to, did they find it in cross-cutting concepts? Was it in disciplinary core ideas? Was it in the engineering practices? Or was it considered one of the performance expectations? And the performance expectations and the DCIs, the disciplinary core ideas, those were marked the same, okay? But so again, the teachers had, these are our standards. This is the expectation for science teachers in classrooms for this, what they're teaching. And so were the questions that were on the ACT Aspire, could they be found in these categories? They marked on their documents if it was found in more than one. So that's where you see some of the percentages. They don't necessarily add up to 100%, okay? But again, we wanted to know what can we do to improve. And so one of the things, we have adopted next generation science standards for Arkansas. And so when you look at disciplinary core ideas, there are grade level topics that are specific to different grade levels. ACT Aspire has agreed to bolster and make sure that the topics that they're covering by grade level, as they write new tests and new forms, that they try to use the topics that are grade specific for students. So for example, in grade 5, where they're talking about Earth systems, they've agreed in their writing topics to make sure that they're trying to address some of those topics specifically. Yes, ma'am.
I think I understand and agree with how you've approached our understanding of the scoring on each one of these subjects. What I don't understand is why it's not the same. So this philosophy about, what we just talked about with math and forward-looking and strategic for early high school in particular, but you don't see that on science. So what does that mean?
So part of it's because our standards are different. So for science, they look very different in the way that they're set up. You don't see science engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts in our math standards, nor do you see them in our ELA standards. So it's the way those standards documents were set up originally and the documents that the teachers had to use to align to the assessment. And so the third-party vendor that we used to do the alignment study, they helped us kind of walk through, okay, here's what the standards documents look like. Here are the data points that we're going to pull from, and that's why you don't see the exact same data piece on each one. Does that help?
It does. It does.
Is there anything else about that, Hope?
There's also a small element of design of test and the way the assessment is designed by purpose. So, for example, the math assessment was designed by purpose to have those integrating essential skill items in there. However, the science assessment, that is not, it's designed by purpose. And so because this is an off-the-shelf product that we're purchasing, you're working with that design that they already had in place. So there's also an element of that in there as to why it would look different.
And that's really a good point. So for science, we saw 97% alignment, and then there's kind of what our conversation with ACT moving forward. So overall evaluation of the process and talking to participants who participated, the 89 participants, we actually surveyed them on what they thought of the process, the design. Did they feel like their information was gathered? They felt confidence in the task that they had completed. They felt that there was sufficient time and that there was training. That they felt like that it was a positive overall result. And again, you can just see some of the comments that were pulled from them. The relationship between the developer's intent and the independent panelist, that it did serve to be able to cross-validate the independent study, your summative information. So overall, we got really good feedback on the actual process that was used. We're going to continue to collaborate with ACT. They are a partner of ours, and we call them frequently to say, we need this, or we need you to talk to us about this, or how was this done? Recently, in fact, and we're in the process right now of sending 50 Arkansas educators. Is it 50? It's 50. We are sending 60 in a couple. Okay, 60, but 50 Arkansas educators actually reviewed the ACT Aspire interim forms this summer. We're sending 60 Arkansas educators to Iowa for 5 days to participate in writing the periodic items for classroom assessments. And they've agreed that in the future for summative to include Arkansas in parts of writing summative questions for the assessment. So those are things that, as we've continued to our partnership and our collaboration with them, things that are important to us, that we're a part of the process, and so we regularly have meetings with them. Just something else I want to hit on real quick before I hit on the NAEP. I know that just in the last couple of weeks, you've heard some different things or different statements, and kind of, I think you even talked a little bit about the test as far as bias and the test as far as Pearson and statements. And we are concerned about that too. When we hear things like that, we want to make sure that is it the case or is it not the case? And we actually reached out to Pearson and received a statement from Pearson that Pearson has full confidence in the effectiveness of the ACT Aspire assessment for state accountability. Pearson also noted that they have a long history in partnership with ACT to deliver high-quality learning assessments and look forward to continuing to work together to support educators and policymakers in achieving their goal. This was from the vice president of Pearson who submitted those statements. And then when we looked at the idea of, is there bias in the assessment? And what does? And we literally had a phone call and said, what do you do? How do you determine if there is, if there isn't? What standard do you follow? ACT Aspire has substantially met the U.S. Department of Education's requirements for assessment peer review. ACT test questions represent a diversity of races, ethnicities, and geographic locations. Every test question goes through a formal external fairness review process to verify that it is unbiased, accessible, and non-offensive to all students before it goes on an actual ACT Aspire assessment. Writers use templates in the creation of ACT Aspire items. Items must meet the requirements of content, depth of knowledge, word count, while also reflecting diversity and meeting fairness standards. ACT Aspire uses the standards for educational and psychology testing, which is actually the golden standard for test creation. ACT actually investigates if there is an invariant of any of the test items in the overall assessment. As they go through their process, they actually put field test items out, and then when answers come in, if there is a variance between race, between gender, between social class, if there is a certain variance, it gets pulled off, goes back through a process, and it goes through again. Until there is no variance, it does not get put on the assessment. So there is an actual standard for how national normed tests are created that's been going on for quite a while.
Could you please make was that a document or a letter? Or
there's talking points that I have gathered from information, but yes, I can make that available.
Make that available, and please send it to, if you could have Aaron send that to the Education Committee.
Okay.
I think would be helpful. And did you ask him about the biscotti question that was raised?
Well, so actually, there are a couple of concerns around that, and one is test security. At this point, we do not see a Biscotti question on any released items that have gone public. So one, if that is a real question on the test, there is a huge testing violation that we'll need to look into. So there's a couple of levels there that are of concern to us. But again,
For those of you that know, in committee earlier this week, this question was specifically raised about a question supposedly from the ACT Aspire exam. I don't know that we know for sure if it is.
we don't
from
know
that.
if it was for sure on the test. We don't know if it was on a released item. It was stated that it was a test from the ACT Aspire. And it was a question specifically read. Again, I don't have access to specific questions from a current, and if a question from, even if it was the folks who participated in the alignment study, that those were secure rooms, folks had to sign. I mean, there are test security measures in place, and so that is something that we're actually looking into. We are contacting ACT to actually say, is this a question or is it not a question?
And so for full context, it was raised as one of those, a question that may not have cultural context for some students, that some students may not know what biscotti is.
Some adults may not know.
And some adults, right. And so I asked that because we
If you
were
have
also.
flown on a plane, if you hadn't flown on a plane, you probably don't know what it is.
Yeah, so
But
it's something that
again,
is something, I bring it to your attention so that, when we do get questions like that, we do follow up with vendors and the appropriate organizations to find out what's going on.
I don't think it asked I think when that senator mentioned it, it wasn't asking what it is. It was using biscotti in the context of the question, and the point was trying to be, well, if they didn't know what all the words in the question are, they're not going to be able to respond to the question.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, my comment is actually towards the process that Ms. Smith spoke about. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood the process that ACT Aspire goes through as far as reviewing, field testing, bias review. All of those processes are the same processes we went through under benchmark and under the PARC assessment. So they're not using a different method or a different standard. They actually use, in some cases, a higher standard than what we were using under benchmark just because of the resources they have available to them. And so that is a very similar process. The only difference is Arkansas educators are just now getting involved in that process, and that's part of what ACT, we worked with them during my time here very muchly. Every time I had the opportunity, I said, anytime we can get Arkansas educators involved, we will do whatever it takes to get them on your committees, and they have become open and receptive to that, which is a huge deal for Arkansas. So very similar processes, we're just now getting to be a part of that.
In fact, when I reached out to ACT Aspire to say, hey, that we've got to have some conversations around this, and they pulled all their experts, one of the first things said was the idea of nationally normed tests nowadays being bias, that myth has pretty much been debunked and hasn't been something that has been talked about really in about a decade. And they were actually surprised that we were asking the question.
It comes up ever so many decades. It was a real big deal in the middle 80s, and then it sort of died down and did, and now it's rearing its head again.
Well,
who even knows why?
So I want to move on to this next part here, which I think also kind of goes with talking about where we are with the ACT Aspire. And just bear with me a little bit longer because I think this one's part that's critical. So NAEP is a national assessment that is given to states, but again, they're random as far as representative, as far as states. Okay, I'm not explaining this part very well. Not every student in the state actually takes the NAEP assessment, all right? So it is the, how am I?
Random.
Yeah, random
Yes.
sampling of students in Arkansas that represent
In fourth and eighth grade.
And the sampling of districts. So you have rural, you have urban, and
yes, that represents Arkansas.
Right.
So in 2013, the Arkansas benchmark in comparison to other state assessments, so this was 2013, determining the proficiency scale for where Arkansas's test was in comparison to the range that you want to be in for the NAEP assessment. So they want you between basic and proficient. They want your state to fall between that category. In Arkansas, for the Arkansas benchmark, we were well below that. On the ACT Aspire for 4th grade, you can see where Arkansas falls. This was from 2017. So you can see Smarter Balance Assessment, you can see ACT Aspire, and you can see where PARC. So all three of those tests fall within the range for NAEP proficiency. So you can see that the rigor of our proficiency scale from where we were in 2013 to where we are in 2017 has changed significantly. And again, we don't want to change the rigor of our standards or the rigor of our assessment. Okay, we've got a bar, but you can see that the assessment that we're using in terms as compared to Smarter Balance and PARC is in the same range. When you look at it from 2013, you can see we're on the lower level there for Arkansas. For 2017, for ACT Aspire, we're right in the middle of the range, but right there again, close to where a Smarter Balance assessment falls. For 8th grade, reading, you can see where we fall there. And then for 2017 ACT Aspire, we've moved up into the center of the range. And again, comparable to the Smarter Balance assessment. 8th grade mathematics in 2013. And then where we fall for the 2017 ACT Aspire. So I wanted to include this in there again because everyone always asks, you know, how do we compare? What's the comparison to other state assessments? And so this kind of at least shows that range of rigor in the proficiency scale in comparison to PARC and Smarter Balance. A lot of when you look on here and you see other tests that are not specifically connected to PARC or connected to Smarter Balance, a lot of those states are buying independent test questions from the item bank that were PARC and Smarter Balance. Both PARC and Smarter Balance were federal funds that were used to create those test questions. Therefore, they are open to other states to purchase and utilize. And so a lot of those states are using from those same test banks and same test questions. So you do have a few states who are writing their own, similar to what we used to do in the Arkansas benchmark days, but most states are pulling from those test bank questions.
Is Kansas writing their own?
Kansas?
Because they jump off the chart on this.
Yeah. Yep.
I just want to mention, this also explains a little bit why we see such perceived differences in the percentage of students that are scoring at the ready mark. Because we used to say that where the arrow is for Arkansas on the left there, that's what we used to say was proficient, and now we're saying that is a much higher bar. Well, naturally, you're going to have a lower percentage of students meeting that. And it doesn't mean you change the bar, but it means that our test now is more reflective of really where we should be, and let's see what we're doing educationally to get there.
Can I ask a question on that? On the last ones, are all the bands, the basic to proficient bands, the same between 2013 and 2015? I can't really read the numbers on the bands on the left. They
Yeah,
are?
260, yes.
Okay, and that was the same for all the other ones we looked at.
And
as
I'll go
well.
back, and I will get copies of the actual report piece and get to you as well.
Thanks.
So where are we today and where are we at the end of the alignment study? We feel pretty good. We feel pretty good about the response that we're going to turn in to the peers later this year. We feel confident that we're going to continue to work with ACT Aspire to make sure they give teachers the information that they need, especially those STEM questions. If we need to tweak or look at our standards there, and then making sure teachers especially in the mathematics high school and early high school, understand those application levels and what's kind of going on in those areas. But we feel good about where we are with our assessment.
Has ACT been good to work with overall?
Yes. I mean, are there moments that we have to get more people on the phone and get the right people on the phone? Yes. But have they responded? I believe they have. I mean, whenever, anytime Hope in the past, when she would, run into a wall, that was maybe, you know, at a lower management level, and we felt like, you know, maybe it's time to go up the ladder and talk to other folks. We've always gotten positive results. When we called to ask questions around some of the things today, they offered to come and be here to answer questions, and have readily said, if you need us, call us.
You add a little bit to that, because I don't, at the beginning of the relationship, from my seat, I did not see the responsiveness from ACT Aspire that I see now. I think part of it is there was a bit of a corporate attitude of we know what we're doing. Shortly, or in short order, they realized that, hey, those folks in Arkansas know what they're doing too. And there was value in listening to what our team had to say. And so that they have become very much more responsive in my book in the last, well, since the beginning of this process. So I credit that to ladies that are standing there in front of you or sitting out there in front of you, and the entire assessment team that's sitting back there, because they have represented our state very well in work with ACT Aspire.
And the assessment unit actually has a call with ACT weekly. You know, is it a perfect relationship? No, it's not a perfect relationship, but it's definitely a working relationship, and one that we have lots of conversation around. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. We are done with our report.
Very good, thank you.
May I ask Stacy, I know we were talking about getting it.
An informed board is a better supportive board.
Well, and that's where we need your help, because we talked about some rumors that in these statements that keep getting made and thrown out there like they're facts, and they get reported as facts and they get repeated as facts. Part of the reason of this report and why I didn't mind Stacy going a little longer than what we normally do with reports is, no, it's not. It's I knew it was going to be long. It needed to be long because this is information that needs to be getting out there. You know, it was brought up in the Essa implementation steering committee, presented then. But you know, I don't know how you communicate good news out, because bad news, as I think Dr. Hill told us once, you know, bad news gets around the world before the good news gets its pants on in the morning. So, you know, that we just need your help getting that out. So any way that y'all can help us get this information out around the state would be very helpful to us.
We've had a long history in Arkansas on national assessments of scoring low. That's a fact. And at some point, we have to quit looking out the window on giving all the excuses of reasons why we're doing so low, and replace it with a mirror and start looking at what are we doing to change it. And I heard that at our special education conference this weekend. Because if there is a group of students that anybody could give an excuse to why they're not learning, it's a student with a disability, right? Not if I'm that child's parent. And when we change the rigor, okay, when we talk about the word modify and you talk about the word accommodate, modify is changing the rigor. Accommodating is giving the resources for that student to reach that rigor. And in our state, we have got to stop modifying or giving excuses for different reasons and figuring out what are the accommodations and resources and wraparound services that we need to be doing so that we can give all students the opportunity to meet the rigor. So we're going to start talking about mirrors and not windows.
Well done. So that brings us to any new business come to the order? Seeing none, do we have any public comment? No one signed up? So the next one belongs to you all. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. We are adjourned.
Box lunches.